We are on our revision series of our general physiology. So first, let us start with concept of constancy. It is nothing but also known as homeostasis, right? Where the body tries to maintain its parameters near the normal value, or else nothing but constant value. So mainly we have three control systems: positive feedback, negative feedback, and feed forward control system. So let us understand one by one. First, let us start with negative feedback. In the name itself, you can understand it is nothing but negative means opposite effect on a particular stimulus. Here the stimulus is required, so the sensors are also needed. First the stimulus is produced, then which that stimulus is received by our sensors, mainly like receptors, and next the effect is produced by our effectors. So the degree of effectiveness which is caused by this negative feedback is measured by means of gain. So is gain is gain in control system. So what is that gain in control system? We can understand by formula, that is correction by error. So the response is opposite to the stimulus, as we discussed. Like for example, if the BP is high, then our negative control system decrease the BP. So like this, it is an opposite effect. So the gain is denoted in negative because it is opposite effect. And also can remember it like negative feedback means negative, so the gain is always, the result is in negative. So here for example, you can take for example an individual is at rest, then its systolic BP is like 120 millimeters, and when it does the exercise, then the BP rises to about 180 millimeters. So first it is 120, but because of exercise we know BP increases to 180. And so let us find out what is the gain of this control system. So we know gain is nothing but correction by error. So here correction is like first because of exercise it is reaching 180, and here one more parameter is whenever he come back to, means after exercise, when he come to rest, when he stop the exercise, then his BP is about 150 millimeters of Hg. So then we know gain is equal to correction by error. So here 180 minus 150, that is 180 when he is doing exercise and 150 when he stop the exercise. So that is the gain. Like what is the negative feedback acting on it? Correction. And the error is like 150 minus original is 120, that is systolic BP. So here if we do 180 minus 150 by 150, then we get 30 by 30. So 30 by 30 is equal to 1. But remember it is minus 1 because it is a negative feedback and it is in opposite direction. So it is minus 1. So what is infinity feedback gain? So infinity feedback gain is nothing but if error is 0. So correction by error, if error is 0, then whatever we calculate we get the infinity, so the gain is infinity now. So here example of this infinity feedback gain is our kidney. So here we are saying that error is 0 in kidney, means kidney can completely reduce blood pressure. For example, if blood pressure is 120, then if it is under kidney control, then it will make it to 0, that is it is 100% effective, that is 0 error. So it is a infinitive feedback gain. So kidney regulating the BP or blood volume. So this is an example of infinity feedback gain. Next, coming to some of the examples of negative feedback, as we're discussing from the starting, that is our BP regulation and blood glucose regulation. You know, whenever there is high blood pressure, it decreases by negative feedback. And endocrine hormone regulation, many of the endocrine hormone regulations are under this. Like you can take classic example like thyroid hormone T3 T4, whenever they increase, then it gives a negative feedback to our anterior pituitary to decrease the thyroid stimulating hormone, so that further thyroid T3 T4 is not increased. So next let us see positive feedback. So here also in the name you can understand positive means it is increasing the stimulus which produces increased response. So here the mnemonic you can take like CLAPS. So C for coagulation cascade, that is blood clotting factors. They undergo amplification, we know, because to form a clot we need to increase the coagulation factors. One coagulation factor gives a positive feedback to the other and thereby increase the number of coagulation factors. And next one you can take LS surge during ovulation, and A is action potential event during depolarization. And depolarization mainly, you know, by sodium influx causes more first small amount of sodium enters and later it gives a positive feedback to other sodium. So like that the sodium influx increases further on. So next P for parturition, physiological process where uterine contractions are increased and head of a baby dilates the cervix, and next it increases the efferents and increases the oxytocin. Oxytocin is a which further increases the uterine contraction. So it is here giving a positive feedback to oxytocin, is again thereby giving the positive feedback to the uterine contractions. So this is also known as Ferguson reflex. This we need to remember. And S is shock. Shock is a hypovolemic shock, like decreases the blood flow, which in turn decreases the perfusion and decreases the weakening of the heart, leads to weakening of the heart, and here the shock worsens later. So this is also positive feedback example. So CLAPS is a mnemonic for the positive feedback mechanism. Next, coming to feed forward control. So this feed forward control is also known as anticipatory system. Here no stimulus is required and the system anticipates a change and gives a corrective measures. So example, you can take body temperature regulation. Skin temperature is called as shell temperature and internal organs temperature is called as core body temperature. So for example, in cold the skin temperature decreases, that everyone knows. So but anticipates core temperature decreases and starts shivering. It starts shivering because to increase the temperature. So here it is an example of feed forward control. And next one is anticipatory tachycardia. This is the case where there is thinking to do exercise. If you think of doing only exercise, our heart rate increases and also respiratory rate increases. This is anticipatory. Still we are not starting exercise, but just because of thinking only this is starting. This is the anticipatory action, that is a feed forward control example. It is anticipatory tachycardia and anticipatory tachypnea. That is just because of thinking this heart rate and respiratory rate are increasing. And next, coming to cerebellum in motor coordination. This is also before just thinking about future, like planning to do this thing or that thing. That is thinking about future, that is about cerebellum. So cerebellum is in motor coordination. This is also example of feed forward control. And next, coming to dynamic changes. Dynamic changes are kept in constancy or equilibrium mainly by homeostasis, hence this is called as dynamic equilibrium. So this is all about homeostasis. Now we are in a cell membrane physiology revision. So cell membrane, it is a composition mainly of lipids, proteins and also carbohydrates. So lipids mainly take up about 40% and proteins take up about 55% and carbohydrates 5%. So here among these lipids, proteins and carbohydrates, you can check out that proteins is having a major component about 55% and the minor component is taken by our carbohydrates, that is about 5%. So this is called as fluid mosaic model. Why it is called? Because the fluid components are here over there lipids and the mosaic component is a protein and it is proposed by the Singer and Nicholson. So here by the name you can say fluid mosaic model. Fluid component is lipid, mosaic component is protein, and this model is proposed by a Singer and Nicholson. And next, coming to phospholipids. So we know phospholipids are present in our cell membrane. Saying that phospholipids will say lipids because lipids are divided into three types like phospholipids, glycolipids and cholesterol. So phospholipid is nothing but, in the name you can understand, lipid along with the phosphate in the name only. And glyco means the word we know carbohydrate. So lipid with the carbohydrate is a glycolipid. And we have a cholesterol. So the phospholipid is the most abundant type of lipid expressed. So among this glycolipids, phospholipids, cholesterol, phospholipid is the most abundant. And here if you remember the lipids, proteins, carbohydrates, protein is the most abundant. So it is lipid express. And the phospholipid, so we have different types like phosphatidylcholine, that is our lecithin. It is a major surfactant lipid in our lung alveoli, and this is its biochemical name is dipalmitol phosphatidylcholine, that is also called as DPPC. That is, so this phosphatidylcholine is a surfactant in a lipid in our lung alveoli. So this biochemical name is DPPC. And this DPPC deficiency mainly predisposed to hyaline membrane disease, that is of course respiratory distress syndrome. So next let us see sphygmomyelin. So in phospholipids we are having different types, so we are discussing them. As we said, phospholipid is most abundant, so first let us discuss about that. We have completed phosphatidylcholine and its biochemical name. Now we will see the sphygmomyelin. So sphygmomyelin, in the name you can understand myelin means it's present in our cell, but sphygmomyelin is considered to be minor surfactant lipid. So if you observe this, phospholipids are like mainly acting as surfactants, right? Because this phosphatidylcholine is also surfactant in lung, but this is a minor surfactant, and L/S ratio is greater than or equal to 2, then it implies the adequate fetal lung maturity. Here L is lecithin, S is sphygmomyelin. So lecithin is nothing but our phosphatidylcholine by sphygmomyelin is S. So this L/S ratio should be greater than or equal to 2. Then only we can say that the fetal lung is matured adequately. It means properly. So if this L/S ratio is differed from this value, then we'll say there is some problem going on in a fetal lung maturity. So here lecithin is L and sphygmomyelin is S. So it is also found in a nerve cell membranes, because here say myelin. Myelin means in nerve cell membranes. So found in nerve cell membranes. And next we are going to see phosphatidylserine. So this is also one of the phospholipid. It is having membrane asymmetry. That is one of the type of phospholipid is only present on either the outer or inner surface, but never on the both surface of the lipid bilayer of the cell membrane. So you can understand, like this phosphatidylserine is having asymmetrical membrane, means one or the other substance is present higher in outer membrane or inner membrane. So that is they differ in proportions. So here we have a eat me signal. Eat me signal is nothing but given by a phosphatidylserine. It is expressed on the outer surface, which acts as a signal for apoptosis. So eat me signal is like it is only calling for program cell that are apoptosis. That is a eat me signal which is provided by our phosphatidylserine. And annexin V staging. Annexin V staging is annexin 5, sorry not V, annexin 5 staging. Annexin 5 mainly forms a complex with the phosphatidylserine if it is expressed mainly on the outer surface, indicating apoptosis. So now we are saying that it will signal that now cell is undergoing apoptosis. So how we will find out that? We are saying it, but in practicality how we will find out? Mainly by this annexin 5 staging. When this annexin 5 is added to this phosphatidylserine, then we can easily find out that apoptosis is going on that specific cell membrane. And next coming to say, so as we said, membrane asymmetry, it is like this. You can see this outer surface is the inner surface, and you can see lecithin is usually expressed only on the outer surface of the lipid bilayer. So lecithin, we know it is nothing but our phosphatidylcholine, right? It is mainly present on our outer surface, but the phosphatidylserine is usually expressed only on the inner surface of the lipid bilayer. So if this this is asymmetrical, not symmetrical, because not same, means sometimes lecithin is present outside and this phosphatidylserine is present on inner side. So that's asymmetrical. If this asymmetrical nature is disturbed, then eat me signal is produced, so that it undergoes apoptosis, because it is improper, it is abnormal. So undergoes eat me signal, and this eat me signal is found out by annexin 5 staging. Next, moving to phosphatidyl inositol. So it is also known as actually inositol triphosphate, so IP3. It can be as a second messenger. So most of the second messenger you can see like IP3. All those things we can see most commonly in our endocrine physiology. Next, coming to cardiolipid. Cardiolipid, in the name you can understand, cardiolipid means in heart lipid. So it is most evidently expressed in the heart. It is a major component of mitochondria in heart. So we need to remember that cardiolipin is mainly found in our mitochondria of heart. So here also we have one test, that is VDRL test. So that is venereal disease research laboratory test, that which mainly detects this anti-cardiolipin antibody in a serum of a syphilitic patient who is infected with the Treponema pallidum. So this is in a Treponema pallidum actually, if it is infected, then cardiolipin is found in that patient, and so to it is like antigen. So to detect it, we find out this anti-cardiolipin antibody in the serum of syphilitic patient infected with this, because if that is present, if cardiolipin is present as an antigen, then anti to it, of course antibody will produce. So we will do this test like this. Next, moving to glycolipids in a cell membrane. So we have discussed till now our phospholipids, right? So phospholipid is nothing but lipid with phosphate. So what are those phospholipids till now we have discussed? That is phospholipid choline, that is also called as lecithin, and we have discussed sphygmomyelin, and also we have discussed phosphatidyl serine. Yeah, right? And also we also discuss about phosphatidylinositol and also cardiolipin. Now let us move on to glycoproteins. So glycoprotein, as we said, carbohydrates with lipid in the cell membrane. So the glycolipids are most evidently seen mainly in our central nervous system and also in the GIT. So there are types of glycolipids like gangliosides, that is mainly GM1 ganglioside. It is a subtype of ganglioside in a GIT epithelial cell membrane, and this GM1 ganglioside act as a receptor for the entry of cholera toxin. And also we have cerebrosides. So these are type of glycolipids. And now let us move on to cholesterol in the cell membrane. So cholesterol is actually precursor which is present in our skin mainly for our vitamin D. So vitamin D, we know what it is called 7-dehydrocholesterol. So when it is acted upon by sunlight, it is converted into vitamin D, very important vitamin, we know that. So fluidity of lipids, it is nothing but like mobility of our membrane. So certain lipids may increase the membrane fluidity. They are like good for health because membrane is flexible, means they are good for health, and membrane functions are also effective. So examples here we can take like polyunsaturated fatty acids, which is also called as PUFA, or also essential fatty acids like our linoleic acid, and also arachidonic acid. And also we have our fish oils, like fish oil tablets are also present, like omega-3 fatty acids, they are rich in this. So all these things, these are polyunsaturated. So this unsaturated cholesterol mainly increases the fluidity, so it is good for health. So nowadays we also see in our oils all this are present. So check out your oil can, whether it is having unsaturated or saturated, and you can find out it is healthy or not. And next you can see certain lipids decrease the membrane fluidity, like rigid. So that if decreased membrane fluidity means the membrane becomes rigid, so rigid with a poor membrane function, and it is also of course bad for health. So example here like saturated fatty acids, trans fatty acids. Here we have our stearic acid, palmitic acid, which are mainly abundant in our junk food. So next let us see what is this fluidity buffer. Is that the cholesterol only maintains the optimal membrane fluidity and does not increase or decrease the membrane fluidity. So this is very important point. Remember that cholesterol does not increase or decrease the fluidity, but just it maintains the fluidity. But the saturated and unsaturated one, unsaturated one increases the fluidity, but saturated one decreases the fluidity. That is, the membrane becomes rigid in the case of saturated fatty acids. Next, moving on to proteins in our cell membrane. So we have completed our lipids portion. Now we are going to our major portion, that is the proteins in our cell membrane. So proteins are the major component, about 55%. So we have mainly three types of proteins, like transmembrane or integral proteins. You can understand, like it is throughout the membrane, present throughout the membrane, and on the both sides, means like externally, internally, on the both sides is present. And peripheral protein, you can see only on one side, present on periphery or one side. And lipid anchored protein, it is also present on one side, but the difference from this from peripheral protein is it is anchored by help of a lipid. So first let us see in detail of transmembrane protein or integral protein. So its function is like hormone receptors like GPCR are important, that is G protein coupled receptor, and pumps like sodium potassium pump or sodium potassium ATPase, ion channels like cystic fibrosis transmission. Cystic fibrosis, we have transmembrane regulator, which regulates mainly opening of chlorine channels. So note that if the mutation of CFTR takes place, if this this cystic fibrosis transmembrane regulation mutation takes place, it is mainly seen in a disease called as cystic fibrosis. So it leads to defective opening of the chlorine channel, of course, because it regulates the positive opening of chlorine channel. So if it is mutated, of course it is leading to the defective opening of our chlorine channel. So now let us move on to the peripheral proteins. So peripheral proteins function is mainly supportive protein, support the structure of certain cells and form certain cell surface receptors also, but most of the receptors are formed by transmembrane. Few receptors are also formed by peripheral proteins, but main function is like supporting structures. So supportive proteins, and they're like RBCs. RBC should be in biconcave shape normally. So this is mainly supported by proteins like spectrin and ankyrin. So if the spectrin is defective, then it may lead to hereditary elliptocytosis, and if ankyrin is defective, then it may lead to hereditary spherocytosis. So here what happens is actually RBCs are getting changing in their shape, and they undergo the extensive damage mainly at the spleen, that is causing hemolytic anemia. So normally they should be in biconcave shape, and they are supported by spectrin anchorin. So if these are defective, they lead to hemolytic anemia. Next, coming to in skeletal muscle. So skeletal muscle, dystrophin is a protein which mainly is an anchor protein which anchors our skeletal muscle. So if there is a Duchenne muscular dystrophy, then the skeletal muscle undergoes the weakness process. This is shown by a Gower sign positive. So what is this Gower sign actually? Gower sign means a person is not able to, if he is bent, then if he want to stand back, he can't stand back without any support. He takes its own leg support or own joint support to means to stand up. That is a Gower sign positive. And also this person may have diaphragm weakness, can cause death. As we're saying skeletal muscles, so we know diaphragm is also having their respective muscles. So if the diaphragm muscles undergo weakness, then of course he can't respirate, this respiratory system is improper and he will undergo the process of death. Next we have a lipid anchored protein. So actually here we have our phosphatidyl inositol. If you remember, third type of protein is lipid anchored. It is IP3. It is also known as mainly GPI proteins. Location is present in RBCs, and they have two important proteins in them, that is CD55, CD59, and the function is mainly to prevent the hemolysis. So let us see this. Lipids are 80%. Okay, we will discuss that later. You can see RBC, CD55, CD59. If these proteins are absent, then RBC may undergo hemolysis, because actually these are present to prevent the hemolysis. So if they are absent, then of course it will undergo hemolysis, that is breakdown of RBC. And if RBC is broken down, if of course our hemoglobin is excreted in urine. This is called as paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria, because in urine hemoglobin is coming out. Paroxysmal nocturnal means it mainly occurring in night. So this is lipids are 80% are more than proteins. Actually what we are saying, we know concentrations are in our cell membrane. Actually proteins are more when compared with lipids, because proteins are about 55% and lipids are only 40% in a normal cell membrane. But here in this case there is an anomaly, like here lipids are 80%, right? Lipids are more than proteins. Proteins are only 20%, and it is seen only in our myelin nerve cell membrane. So this is very important. In myelin nerve cell membrane, our lipids are more when compared with proteins, but in all other cell membranes our proteins are more when compared with our lipids. So this we need to remember. This is an exceptional case. And next, highest protein is present, about 70% content is seen only in our inner mitochondria membrane itself. So inner mitochondrial membrane is very rich in protein. About 70% of protein is present. So let us see one of the MCQs in our cell membrane, like plasma membrane is mainly composed of proteins. Exception also we know, lipids are mainly present in our nerve cell membrane when compared with proteins. And one more is decreased protein lipid ratio is seen in our myelin sheath membrane, because decreased protein lipid ratio means that L/S ratio is decreased, means lipids are more in case of myelin sheath membrane. And next, membrane fluidity is mainly increased by a linoleic acid, because fluidity is increased by unsaturated fatty acids. So that's it. Now let us move on to cell organelles and cellular junctions. So this is also one of the important topics. So cell organelles, mainly we have two important components of the cells, like endoplasmic reticulum and Golgi, which are closely related to each other. So they are also sometimes called as twin organelles, because they form vesicles, and they also have some similar functions like transport of these vesicles, production of these vesicles. So they are also called as twin organelles. So we know endoplasmic reticulum is mainly two types, rough and smooth type. Rough, granular, because of presence of ribosomes on surface. Smooth is agranular, because no granules are present on the surface. So let us see some detail of rough endoplasmic reticulum. Its main function, to synthesize proteins. That is nothing but the process of translation, mainly with the help of ribosomes. And the folding of protein is mainly done by the chaperones. Chaperones are heat shock proteins. So if there is destruction of these folded proteins or leading to production of toxic proteins, then there is ER assisted degradation, ERAD. ERAD means endoplasmic assisted degradation takes place. If this toxic proteins are formed, then we need to destroy them. Then there is nothing but here we need to understand that this is a folding of proteins is done by chaperones, and if the proteins are misfolded, then may lead to toxic proteins, and this is destroyed by our ERAD means endoplasmic reticulum assisted degradation. And next, tagging. So misfolded proteins are actually also binded with ubiquitin. This process is called tagging. This what happens? It moves to the proteosomes. After moving to the proteosomes, there the protein destruction takes place, and finally they are destructions. So even by means of as we said, ERAD is useful for degradation of toxic proteins, that is misfolded proteins. Even by help of this binding of ubiquitin or tagging with ubiquitin, also move to the proteosomes, and protein destruction takes place in this way. And next, what happens if there is absence of EARD? Then it causes diseases like prion disease, which is mainly seen in our central nervous system, where actually you see here this is a gene PRPC, which is a normal gene, but this is a misfolded protein. It's a normal protein. This is a misfolded protein. S is present. This is a misfolded protein, which is leading to accumulation. And examples you can see like Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. And one more thing, we have A beta amyloid formation. This is also misfolded protein accumulation. It leads to mainly our Alzheimer's disease. So I can remember like A beta amyloid lead to Alzheimer's disease. And next, coming to smooth endoplasmic reticulum. Their functions are like synthesis of steroid hormones, storage of calcium in the skeletal muscle, especially then it is called as sarcoplasmic reticulum, and detoxification of drugs in the liver. And smooth endoplasmic reticulum of the liver expresses mainly the cytochrome P450 enzymes, that is CYP450. So because of this cytochrome P450 enzymes only, the drugs in the liver are undergoing metabolism process or detoxification. And next, coming to Golgi apparatus. So Golgi apparatus functions are mainly post-translational modification, and the Golgi apparatus is present mainly nearer to the rough side of endoplasmic reticulum, and the protein synthesis in the rough endoplasmic reticulum takes place, there is translation. So proteins move to the Golgi, and after that the carbohydrate side chain is added to the protein, which is mainly forming a glycoprotein or glycosylation process, which ensures the stability of proteins. So what that Golgi does is it just adds its carbohydrate and undergoes the process of glycosylation and form a glycoprotein. So next, what happens is sorting of protein takes place. So what is this process? Sorting of protein means the Golgi apparatus tags mannose-6-phosphate to the proteins. So these proteins move only to the lysosomes. So absence of this mannose-6-phosphate tagging leads to I cell disease. I means inclusion bodies cell disease. So this is very important. So the tagging of mannose-6-phosphate is process called as sorting of proteins. So if it is absent, it leads to I cell disease, that is inclusion bodies disease. Next, move on to parts of Golgi apparatus. So we know Golgi apparatus have receiving end, releasing end, and middle it has a Golgi apparatus proper. So this receiving end mainly receives protein, and it is also known as cis end. It is so close to rough endoplasmic reticulum. And the Golgi apparatus proper functions of Golgi apparatus occur here, that is processing end. And the releasing end, it is also known as trans end of Golgi. It is mainly useful for storage of proteins in the form of vesicles. So it is this end is mainly away from the rough endoplasmic reticulum, because this is a trans end, right? This trans end may be nearer to or facing towards the cell membrane, because these vesicles now need to go out from a cell membrane. And next, coming to lysosome. So lysosome's function is like destruction of unwanted substances. So in a computer, as we have recycle bin, so same like this, if we want to throw the unwanted substances, we usually throw it to the lysosome. So they destruct the unwanted substances like bacteria, etc., or any other harmful microbes or particles. So by means of like they have the hydrogen or proton hydrogen ATPase channel protein on the surface, so it helps to concentrate the hydrogen within the lysosomes. So as this hydrogen is increased inside the cell, the pH falls so that it becomes more acidic, and this acid causes mainly destructions of the substances. So the acid destroys the lysosome itself. Sometimes what happens, as acid is increased, the lysosome itself may also destruct. Then this is called as suicidal bag. As the name you can say, suicide means self-killing. So it is suicidal bag when the lysosome itself is killed. Or it is also residual bodies, also called as residual bodies. So enzymes which are seen exclusively in lysosomes start with acid, because they have mainly acid. So acid hydrolysis and acid lipases. Next, autophagy. Autophagy is also in the name you can say auto means self, phagy means destruction, self-destruction. It helps in survival during starvation. So when a person is undergoing process of starvation, autophagy is the one which helps to survive, because all energy is now gone. So what happens in this process, let us see. So discovery of this function is awarded Nobel Prize. So the mechanism is nothing but like you can see, this is the lysosome. So now lysosome even destroys our mitochondria. So we know mitochondria is providing energy for us. So if this is destroyed, mainly destruction of mitochondria, the proteins are released and leading to metabolism and energy is produced, and so we can survive even in the starvation by means of autophagy. So why our cell is choosing only mitochondria? Because our mitochondria inner membrane is very rich in protein. So whenever we destroy this, we get a large amount of protein so that it undergoes metabolism and finally energy is produced. So now let us move on to peroxisomes. So peroxisome function is like destruction of free radicals. So now free radicals cause many diseases. So we need to destruct them by means of peroxisome. So how they destruct? Such as hydrogen peroxide by catalase enzyme. So this is very important. So the catalase enzyme is the one which destructs the free radicals. So the drug form of catalase is our pseudo catalase. In the name only can understand, pseudo means it's not true. It is like commercially produced product, pseudo catalase. It is used in mainly treatment of a vitiligo or any other skin diseases. Next, peroxisomes, another function is like oxidation of long chain and very long chain fatty acids. So deficiency of this phytanic acid oxidase leads to Refsum's disease, that is peroxisome storage disorder. So this we need to remember. And next, coming to cytoskeleton. In the name you can understand, cyto means cell, skeleton means like support. So it is nothing but cytoskeleton filament is also called as bone of a cell. It provides the strength to the cell, bone of the cell. Based on the size, they are classified as like big size, small size and intermediate size between them. So big size are the microtubules, they are big filaments. Intermediate are the intermediate filaments. Most abundant are the intermediate filaments, and small size filaments are the microfilaments. So intermediate are the most abundant when compared with big and small filaments. So now let us start with our microtubules, that are big sized tubules. So these are structural proteins, are mainly having three structural proteins: kinesin, dynein and tubulin. So let us see the functions. The first function is like axonal transport. So we know like a neuron here, cell body, axon, synaptic end. So this is synthesis of neurotransmitters. So this, you can see this is forward or antegrade axonal transport that is mainly done by our kinesin. This kinesin helps here, like the products move from cell body to synapse, storage of neurotransmitter. And this is reverse process, reverse or retrograde axonal transport, that is from synapse end to the cell body, and this is called as dynein. So here dynein helpful. So let us see like bacteria like tetanus toxin and viruses like rabies, polio. So these all are mainly undergoing the process of reverse axonal transport as a mode of infection. So you can see when these infections are going on, they mainly go in reverse action, that is from synapse end to the cell body end with the help of dynein protein. So this dynein, kinesin, tubulin are structural proteins of our microtubules. So what are microtubules? They are the big size cytoskeleton filaments. So now let us see about our dynein. So dynein mainly help in movement. So in lung there is synchronized movement of cilia, that is called as metachromism towards the nasopharynx, which mainly help to clear the sputum, and it is like a protective function because the sputum which is present in lung easily comes out to the nose and it gets out. So even in sperm, fallopian tube motility, this dynein helps in the movement. So absent in dynein, so this is a very important structure. If this dynein is absent, it leads to immotile cilia syndrome, also called as cartagenous syndrome. And next, it is characterized as this cartagenous syndrome is characterized by a triad like sinusitis, bronchiectasis, situs inversus, that is due to immotile cilia. During development of a baby, this cilia is required for the rotation of internal organs. So if it is not happening, then situs inversus means the organs are reversed, like heart moves from left side to right side. So like that, every organ may reverse in their direction, and then also present with a infertility due to asthenospermia, that is immotile sperm. So these are the conditions seen in the cartagenous syndrome or also in the immotile cilia syndrome. Now let us see the movement of chromosomes during cell division, essential for cell survival, that is using tubulin protein. We need to movement the chromosomes. So if we have the microtubule inhibitors, like which inhibit the chromosomal movement, it is used as anti-cancer drug, because in anti-cancer drug, if these are not undergoing chromosomal movement, then our cell may die, so that cancer cell may not increase their population. So here these drugs are like vincristine, vinca alkonides, and also paclitaxel taxanes. So and also they are used for the treatment of gout, that is our colchicine. Next, moving to microfilaments. So microfilaments are what? They are very small size cytoskeleton. So these are small size filaments and they are proteins mainly having actin and myosin protein, and their function is to their functions like skeletal muscle contraction, sliding filament theory, and cell motility like actin polymerization. Listeria monocytogenes induces the actin polymerization poly A tail, that is also called as tumbling motility, that is done by our Listeria monocytogenes. And next, coming to the intermediate filaments between these filaments. So this is the most abundant and the tumor markers. So types are like keratin. Keratin is present in the epithelial cells, and epithelial cell tumors are carcinomas mainly. And tumor marking is by this marker called as cytoskeleton. This is especially seen in a squamous cell carcinoma. So especially in squamous cell carcinoma, our tumor marker is cytokeratin. And keratin accumulation in an alcoholic liver disease is seen as Mallory-Denk bodies. And desmin is present muscle cells. So tumor markers in mainly sarcomas, and most fatal sarcoma is the rhabdomyosarcoma. And vimentin is present in connective tissue, that is fibroblast. So it is marker in tumors of mainly mesenchymal origin. And glial fibrillary acidic protein, that is GFAP, present astrocytes in glial cells, marker of astrocytoma and gliomas. And we have lamin, which is present in nucleus of cells. Lamin mutation causes progeria, that is premature aging, mainly seen in Brenner syndrome. So let us see some of the markers of cellular components. So in cell membrane mainly we see the marker, that is, these markers are nothing but they are found only in these structures. So the cell membrane only we see sodium potassium additive is present only in cell membranes. Nucleus, RNA polymerase, histone deacetylase, these are only present in a nucleus. And acid phosphatase is only present in a lysosomes. Catalase, urate oxidase is only present in peroxisomes. Glucose 6-phosphate in endoplasmic reticulum. Galactosyl transferase in Golgi, and lactate dehydrogenase in our cytoplasm. So these are like structures, just we need to remember them. And next, let us move on to our cellular junctions. So cellular junctions like two types, where cell attached to cell, another cell, that is cell junction, cell to cell junction. Another is cell which is attached into the basement membrane, that is also called as basal lamina junction. So let us first see cell to cell junction. So this is cell 1, cell 2. So between this cell and this cell, you can see first this is adherence junction, this is tight junction, gap junction. So now let us understand it clearly. So first, zona adherens. Zona adherens or desmosomes are same. Zona adherens is nothing but they attach to the actin. Zona adherens mainly attached to the actin, but the desmosomes are also similar to zona adherens, except that it is attached to intermediate filaments, and it is seen in the areas of mechanical stress. That is both this zona adherens and desmosomes seen in the areas of mechanical stress like heart, skin, also in the uterine cervix. And the proteins which are forming the zona adherens and desmosomes are desmogleins and desmocolins. And tight junctions are also called as zona occludens. These are rope-like tight junctions between cells. You can see this is a tight junction. So proteins here are claudin, occludin. Actually, adherent junctions, they just adhere, but the tight junctions are tightly adhere so that anything should not leak out. So the proteins are claudin, occludin. Location you can see mainly in blood-brain barrier, intestine, kidneys, choroid plexus, and also regulate the paracellular movement. Paracellular means sideward movement of the substances. And next, moving to gap junctions. So in the name only you can understand they are like a gap between two cells, so they can easily transport the substances from one cell to other. Here the proteins are connexons, and it has 6 subunits. Each is known as connexin, and it is mainly present in heart, smooth muscle neurons. So the cardiac gap junctions are located mainly in the intercalated disc. Next, coming to cell basement membrane junctions. So here types we have hemidesmosomes, cell adhesion molecules, that is CAM, cadherins, integrins, and selectins. So remember, if you remember that desmosomes are nothing but cell to cell junction, but hemidesmosomes, that is half of the desmosome, is useful for cell basement membrane junction. Next, moving to clinical scenario, like studies completed on 5-year-old boy show an accumulation of cholesterol esters and also triglycerides in liver, spleen, intestine, and calcification is seen on both adrenal glands. And additional studies indicate the cause to deficiency in acid lipase. Here in the name acid lipase, you can understand the answer is lysosome, because as I said, if you get the word acid, means those kind of proteins are present in our lysosomes. So this enzyme is mainly located in our lysosome. So this clinical state describes mainly Wallmann's disease. So this is all about our revision section, and next let us move on to other lessons. This membrane transport. So we know mainly it is classified based on the energy utilization. That is, main basis of energy utilization. It is depending on ATP. So because ATP forms the basis of the classification. So it is divided into active transport and passive transport, in which active transport requires ATP and the passive transport does not require any type of ATP or energy to transport. So let us understand this. In the passive transport, we have mainly our simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion, special form of diffusion, that is our non-ionized form of diffusion, and we also have our osmosis. So let us see each part in detail. So simple diffusion, here no ATP is required. As the name only can understand, it's a simple process, no ATP is required, but it requires a concentration gradient. You can see this is a higher concentration to the lower concentration. So this is how the oxygen gases, simple gases, all this undergo simple diffusion. They follow the concentration gradient, that is from high concentration to low concentration. So the diffusion is a classical type of passive transport, and example, you can take a respiratory membrane as a classical example where diffusion of gases takes place. So directly it is related, that is directly proportional to the surface area, that is if the surface area increases then the diffusion increases, and inversely proportional to the membrane thickness. Of course, if the membrane is thicker then low diffusion, if the membrane is thin then higher diffusion. So it is mainly this proportionality is given by Fick's law, that is D is equal to, that is diffusion rate is equal to concentration gradient into area by thickness. That is, it is directly proportional to concentration gradient and the area, but inversely proportional to the thickness. This is exclusively, it is related only to the simple diffusion because it is given by Fick's law and it is only exclusive to the simple diffusion. So the clinical association or applicability is in emphysema. So what happens in emphysema is actually there is decrease in the surface area. So this leads to decrease in a diffusion, because we know diffusion is directly proportional to the surface area. And one more clinical example is pulmonary fibrosis. Here the lung tissue is getting thickened, so increase in thickness. So as the thickness is increased, diffusion is decreased. So and one more probability, one more feature of diffusion is directly proportional to lipids, because solubility of the lipids, because our lipid bilayer is lipid soluble substances, so easily can pass through it. So it is directly proportional to solubility of lipids, and inversely proportional to the size, because if the cell size is very high then diffusion is low. When size is size of particles, if the size of particles are low then they can easily undergo diffusion process. If the size of particles is very high then it is very hard to undergo the diffusion process. Now let us see in passive transport, another is facilitated diffusion. In the name only you can understand, it is facilitated by some carriers or proteins, special group of proteins are carriers. So here glucose and water in the human body are mainly transported by this mechanism. Like glucose is transported by means of GLUT transporters or carrier proteins, and water by mainly aquaporin. And there is also some special form of diffusion that is called as non-ionic diffusion, where it is example in NH3 in kidneys and absorption of salicylate drugs. So these are mainly special form of diffusion. So here in this diagram you can easily understand, this is the NH3, this is the non-ionized form. So when it undergoes the process of diffusion, it gets ionized by adding one amount of hydrogen to it. So NH3 plus H, it gives rise to NH4, that is ammonium ionized form. So now it is ionized form. So non-ionized form, because of the process of diffusion getting ionized, this is nothing but the special form of diffusion. And osmosis, here water is considered as watchdog for sodium, that is always the water follows the sodium. For example, now in the cell there is sodium and water. If the sodium gets out from the cell, then even water follows it. So this is how, so we say it is a watchdog for the sodium, water is always. So this is nothing but osmosis. Osmosis is nothing but mainly dependent on the water concentration, that is movement of water from the higher concentration to the lower concentration. So here the sodium is a solute and water is a solvent, and here the osmotolically active particle is a concentration of solutes, that is milliosmoles. Once let us see this one. This is a concentration of solutes. Osmolarity mainly depends on concentration of solutes, that is milliosmoles per liter. It is the most commonly used, and that is about 280 to 300 milliosmoles per liter. And osmolality, here liti, here R, here L, liti means in kilograms, milliosmoles per kilograms. And plasmaosmolarity is 2 into sodium plus 0.05 of glucose plus 0.36 into Bun. Here Bun means blood, urea, nitrogen. So when this sums are given, we can easily use this formula. And now, so we have completed a passive diffusion, passive transport, that is no need of energy. So we don't require any energy in the case of simple diffusion, in the case of facilitated diffusion, special that is ionized diffusion, and also osmosis. So this is very important. Here no energy is required. Now let us see active transport. Active transport means it requires energy. So it is further divided into primary active transport and secondary active transport. This mainly ends in pumps and it has ATPases. So examples you can take sodium potassium ATPase, calcium pumps that is smooth endoplasmic reticulum, and proton pump that is proton ATPases. So let us see the important one among this primary active transport, that is sodium potassium ATPases. So it is universal, that is present in all cells. That is also called as ubiquitous, and it is also a transmembrane protein, that is it is present throughout the membrane. So its coupling ratio is, that is sodium is to potassium is 3 is to 2, because we know 3 sodiums are get out from the cells and 2 potassium are enter into the cell. Actually why this pump is working is because we know inside the cell it is always negative because of less amount of positive ions present, and outside it is more positive, because in this process only you can understand, because 3 sodium are getting means 3 positive ions are getting out, means outside it is more positive, whereas only 2 potassium are coming in, means only 2 potassium means low positivity. So inside the cell there is always negative and outside the cell there is always positive because of more ions are pumping out. So these 2 subunits are actually alpha and beta. They have 2 subunits in the sodium potassium ATPase, and this is heterodimer. Heterodimer means they are not similar. You can say alpha beta, they are not similar. So its coupling ratio is 3 to 2, which is important. And alpha subunit is the most important subunit when compared with beta. Why? Because alpha subunit mainly contains the binding sites. The extracellular, it has 2 binding sites, extracellular, intracellular. So you can see this is the extracellular and this is the intracellular. The extracellular binding site mainly attaches a drug called as ovabin binding site, and also it binds mainly to potassium, because now it flips and it need to bring the potassium inside. And the intracellular, it has mainly sodium binding site and ATP binding site, because ATP is present inside the cell because our mitochondria is inside the cell. So ATP binding site and sodium binding site, because sodium need to get out from the cell now. So it is intracellular binding site. And next let us see the secondary active transport. Secondary active transport, what happens is here 2 or more substances are transported. If they move in the same direction, then it is called as co-transporter or synports, and if they move in the opposite direction, then we call it as exchangers or antipodes. So let us see co-transporters. Here we have example sodium glucose co-transporters, SGLT. Here you can see S, sodium glucose linked transport, that is the full form. So it is of 2 types. First one is present in intestine. So you can see here sodium and glucose are getting at a time to our intestine. That is why if we take ORS, in ORS there are sodium and also many other ions, but mainly sodium and glucose are taken at a time by means of this sodium glucose transporters. And another one is sodium glucose type 2. It is mainly seen in kidneys, in our proximal convoluted tubule. Next, coming to sodium potassium chlorine to chlorine. These are co-transporters which is mainly evident in the loop of Henle of our kidney, and this is also called as Bartin. If there is any mutation in this, then it is called as Bartter syndrome, and the drug blocker acting upon this is a loop diuretic, that is the furosemide. And next we have the sodium iodide symport. This is mainly present in the thyroid gland. It simultaneously takes the sodium and iodine at a time into the cell. And next, coming to exchanges or antipodes, that is opposite in direction. For example, here chlorine and bicarbonate exchanger, that is for example inside the cell bicarbonate is present, then outside the cell mainly sodium and chloride are present mainly outside the cell. So now what happens is bring the chlorine inside and it moves the bicarbonate outside. So this is like opposite in direction. Both are not coming to the same side, they are moving to the opposite side. It is mainly present in our RBC and play important role in respiration. So this is also known as anion exchange, because you see these both are negatively charged, anion exchange AE. And we also have some special type of transport, that is endocytosis and exocytosis. Endocytosis means actually vesicles are coming inside. Exocytosis means vesicles are getting out. This exocytosis is also called as amniocytosis, or also it is called as reverse pinocytosis, because what is pinocytosis means drinking water, means taking inside, but this reverse pinocytosis means getting out. So next we also have our vesicular transport. So what is this vesicular transport? By means of vesicles the transport is going on, and remember this is also active transport, that is it requires the ATP to move the vesicles, and there is no role of any concentration gradient. This is very important. We have seen in our concentration gradient is playing a major role in case of all our transports, passive transport, active transport. But in case of vesicular transport, there is no concentration gradient and requires mainly certain special types of proteins. In the case of exocytosis, we will mainly require the snare proteins, synaptobravin, and also we require the calcium ions. And in the case of endocytosis, we mainly require the clathrin, megalin, and also sometimes we require the calcium for the case of endocytosis. And next, let us move on to exocytosis in detail. So actually the vesicle is stored or processing, and later it is released according to the stimulus. But sometimes it may be regulated process that is called as non-constrictive exocytosis. And if there is no storage, no processing, and direct release of the vesicle, it is called as constitutive exocytosis. Means here there is no processing, no storage, and directly it is released whenever the stimulus is produced. So actually one more process we have, that is transcytosis. Transcytosis means here both endocytosis and exocytosis are present. We can see this transcytosis example is in intestinal cell. And next, let us move on to the membrane transport graph. So you can see this is the rate of transport and this is a concentration of substance. Simple diffusion is like straight. You can see here there is a plateau, that is the saturation kinetics. So what is the saturation kinetics is, whenever we use like in case of facilitated diffusion or active transport, we use some carrier proteins or channels. So these are saturated when the amount of substance is more than the limit, then this is called as saturation kinetics. But simple diffusion, it is just dependent on concentration gradient. So this simple diffusion doesn't have any saturation kinetics. So you can see the substances which have saturation kinetics are carrier proteins and channels. Mainly carrier proteins, we have facilitated diffusion, and channels active transport. So non-saturated kinetics is seen in simple diffusion. So here you have some of the questions which you can refer, and that's it. So this is all about our membrane transport. At our cellular fluid. So first we need to understand the total body weight. It's a major contribution for body weight is our water. So the total body water in male is about 60% of the body weight. That is about 42 liters of water is present in a 60% body weight of male especially. So what are the determinants of total body water? Mainly sex, that is in male. It is about 60% of body weight, that is they're having more lean body mass. So that is like free fat mass, so about 70 milliliters per 100 grams. And in female it is about 50% of body weight, that is because more fat tissue is present in female. So you can remember here that the body fat is inversely proportional to water. So where there is more water there is low body fat, and where there is high body fat there is low water. That's it. So it also depends on age, like in children it is about 75% of body weight more than adults. So according to sex, it is the body water is more in male, and according to age, children having more amount of body water, that is about 75% when compared with adults. Now let us check out the types of cellular fluid. Total body weight total body water is about 42 liters, and the fluid can be either intracellular, that is inside the cell, then it is 2/3 of total body water, that is about 40%, that is about 28 liters. So intracellular fluid is only more at 28 liters, but the extracellular fluid is outside the cell and it's 1/3, and its total body weight water is about 20%, that is only 14 liters. So together 14 plus 28 we have total 42 liters of water. So you need to remember that intracellular water is about 40%, that is about 28 liters, and extracellular is 14 liters, that is 20%. So intracellular fluid is more. So the extracellular fluid can be interstitial fluid and plasma together, we know. And interstitial fluid is nothing but in between the two cells. So the measurements of total body weight is done by a Stewart-Hamilton method, which is an indicated dilution principle, which mainly uses a certain indicators, like here you get the formula A is equal to C into V. So we have many calculations based on that. So if you reverse this formula, you can understand A is equal to C into V means V this side, then V is equal to A by C, right? So where A is the amount and C is the concentration and V is the volume. So to find out any new volume, we use this formula. Here A is the amount and concentration C. These both are given in your question. So we need to find the new volume by means of this formula. So V is equal to A by C. We need to remember that. Like you can remember like AC. So VAC. Right, it's very simple to remember. Next, now let's see the volumes and indicators. So our total body water, its indicator is deuterium oxide, tritium oxide, and extracellular fluid, its indicator is inulin. It is most commonly used. And we also have a sucrose, mannitol, sodium thiophylls sulfate. So all these are indicators of extracellular fluid. And for a plasma, the extra indicator is the radio labeled albumin.
And also we can use the Evans blue dye. And for blood, the indicator is chromium tagged RBC. So if we tag the red blood cell just with a chromium, we can indicate it. So these are the indicators. And here you can see the blood volume is equal to plasma volume by 1 minus hematocrit. So in a child, the blood volume is 70 milliliters per kg of a body weight. So this we need to remember. Yeah, we'll move on to that. Yeah. So remember, blood volume is equal to plasma volume by 1 minus hematocrit, and in a child the blood volume is 70 milliliters per kg of body weight. So here you can see the direct and indirect measurements. So first let us move to direct measurement. Actually the substances, or here the components which have these indicators have the direct measurements, but the components which don't have these indicators, they have the indirect measurement. So let us see the direct measurement. So here the indicators are available, like in the case of total body water, yeah, its indicator is deuterium oxide, tritium oxide, just now we have seen. And extracellular fluid, its indicator is inulin, most common sucrose, mannitol, and also sodium thiosulfate. And our plasma volume, here for plasma we have radio-labeled albumin, Evans blue dye. So once again it will be like a revision for you. And the blood volume, it's chromium tagged. So this all have indicators. So this is directly measured, and indirectly measured ones are, they are not having indicators, like intracellular fluid, interstitial fluid. So what to do with them, or how to find out them? So we have like their indirect rows. So here intracellular fluid minus total body water gives you extracellular fluid plus intracellular fluid, right? So intracellular fluid is equal to total body water minus extracellular fluid, we can easily find out. And interstitial fluid minus ECF is plasma volume plus interstitial fluid volume, right? So to find out this interstitial fluid volume is equal to extracellular fluid minus plasma volume. So this is how we derive these formulas, and we can use it in our sums. And now let us see the ions in extracellular fluid and intracellular fluid. So the major ions in extracellular fluid, that is positive ions, are sodium, and the negative anion in case of extracellular fluid is chlorine. And in intracellular fluid, of course everyone know potassium, and next comes the magnesium in the case of positive cations, and negative anions are phosphate, and next comes the protein. So the pH is like in extracellular fluids about 7.4, and in intracellular fluids the pH is about 7. So water loss and osmolarity, let us check out now. So water loss mainly in the form of sweat, that is about 100 ml per day, and there is insensible water loss. So what is this insensible means? It is not in our conscious level, so we don't know when it is lost. Insensible water loss mainly seen in evaporation, mainly through our skin, lungs, etc. It is about 600 to 700 milliliters per day. So next we have osmosis. So osmosis is nothing but the water follows the sodium like a hot we have discussed it already. And osmoles is nothing but which determine the osmolarity, right? And 1 mole is equal to gram molecular weight, and 1 mole of sodium chloride is equal to it's like sodium, its weight is 23 gram molecular weight, and chlorine is 35.5. So the molecular weight of sodium and chloride is written over here, and so if we plus them we get 1 mole of sodium chloride, its gram molecular weight is about 58.5. So that's what we are saying, 1 mole is equal to gram molecular weight. So 1 mole of sodium chloride is equal to 58.5. And now let us check out how to calculate one equivalent. So one equivalent is gram molecular weight by valency. So here we have the example of calcium. So calcium is equal to 40 by 2, calcium's gram molecular weight is 40. So its valency is 2, you can see here, right, 70 by 2, and example of calcium. So here we get the equivalent of calcium is 20. So like this we need to find out. And next, the normal plasma osmolarity is 300 milliosmoles. It's a normal value. So the major contributed for the osmolarity is by our sodium. It gives about 270 milliosmoles per liter. But the minor one, protein, it contributes really very very minor, that is about only just 0.75 milliosmoles per liter. Yes. Next, because high molecular weight and less concentration. So because of its high molecular weight and less concentration. Now let us see the types of solutions. We have isotonic, hypertonic, right? Isotonic means it's of same osmoles. Example, you can take 0.9% of sodium chloride. So here the cell shape remains normal, only the volume increases. And hypertonic solution is 300 milliosmoles of urea. Here the cell swells and bursts. Yeah, because hypertonic means it's less solute, so water starts moving from extracellular side to intracellular side. And in hypertonic solution, whenever we put the cell, here the example is 350 millimoles liters of mannitol. Here the cell shrinks because it's outer having more solute, so this cell starts to shrink because intracellular fluid start escaping towards extracellular fluid. And here we have our Darrow-Yannet diagram, very important diagram and also very simple. So the volume changes in the extracellular fluid and intracellular fluid are noted here, and also osmolarity changes are kept in mind here. So let us see them. So this is an example of basic diagram: 1/3 of extracellular fluid, 2/3 of intracellular fluid, and this is a graph like this x-axis, y-axis. X-axis determines the volume, y-axis determines the osmolarity, and normal osmolarity is 300 milliosmoles per liter. So let us start the situations. We have 4 situations here, and let us understand this. The first one is addition of isotonic saline. Isotonic means it is having same solutes like our body. So saline infusion in extracellular fluid, right? So whenever we take saline, it goes to extracellular fluid. Just the volume is increased. You can see ECF volume increases because now we are adding more more volume. So volume is increased in the extracellular fluid, and ICF volume doesn't have any change. It is similar because we are not disturbing it. And extracellular fluid osmolarity also no change because it is isotonic, and even the intracellular fluid osmolarity is also having no change. So this is mainly seen in the shock patients. So the treatment here is nothing but saline infusion. And next comes the loss of isotonic sodium chloride in diarrhea. Whenever we have heavy diarrhea with any infection, so here what happens is there's equal loss of isotonic sodium chloride, means same solutes are gone. So here extracellular volume for sure decreases because here it has increased if we add it. So if we remove now, of course it decreases. And intracellular fluid volume no change because we are not disturbing it. And extracellular fluid osmolarity also no change because it is isotonic solution getting out. And intracellular fluid osmolarity also no change. So this is mainly seen in the loss of isotonic sodium chloride in the diarrhea, and it's causing dehydration because water is getting out, so we need to drink more water in this case. And next, coming to excessive intake of sodium chloride in the case of hypertension. So whenever we eat heavy high salty food, so doctors always prescribe to not to eat more salty food like that. So why, we'll understand this process. So here actually what happens, now we'll guess without seeing it by this diagram, right? So excessive intake of sodium chloride means more solute is present in extracellular fluid, means it's hypertonic now. Hypertonic means what happens, now the sodium calls the water to come near it. So the intracellular fluid now shifts towards extracellular fluid. So now we can easily understand now the extracellular fluid volume is increased as well as extracellular fluid osmolarity is increased. But intracellular fluid, as it's moving towards that side, intracellular fluid volume is decreased. So once let us see and check out they're right or not. So you can see, yeah, extracellular volume is increased, intracellular fluid volume is decreased, extracellular fluid osmolarity increased, intracellular fluid osmolarity also increases. Yeah, this is important. Remember that even intracellular fluid osmolarity increases. So here the treatment is to mainly reduce, to take the salt, yeah, and that is you need to reduce the salt intake. And now we are going to see the syndrome of inappropriate antidiuretic hormone. So first we need to know what is the normal function of antidiuretic. It mainly reabsorbs sodium and chloride, and also it prevents the dilution of urine. Yeah, so here we'll see now. By this diagram we'll try to guess. So here if you see here, the extracellular fluid is increased, its volume is increased, but osmolarity is decreased, means it's hypotonic. When it's hypotonic, you can understand its osmolarity is decreased, but the volume is increased because of adding more solution or fluid. But because of this, intracellular fluid volume is increased and its osmolarity also decreased. Yeah, it's of course a hypotonic solution, right? So here the ECF volume is increased, extracellular volume is increased, intracellular, what is this? Intracellular volume is increased, yeah, and extracellular fluid osmolarity is decreased, and intracellular fluid osmolarity is also decreased. So here the water, this is called as water overload, and this is a process of dilution. So these are all this diagram, this is important. This diagram is called as Darrow-Yannet diagram, which is very important, so remember that. So this is all about general physiology revision series. So if you like our channel, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. And next we are also going to do other parts of physiology revision series. We are in membrane potential, so let us discuss different types of membrane potential. So first we are going to deal with our resting membrane potential. So in the name itself you can understand that is something is in rest. So what is it? Let us observe it. So at rest mainly the intracellular potassium is very high. So due to the concentration gradient, the potassium moves from inside to outside. Our cells have a lot of potassium inside, and outside there is less potassium. So potassium tries to move inside to outside of the cell. So the positive charges move outside and the cell becomes negative, of course, because potassium is positive. As it moving outside, the cells become negative. So the negative potential developed inside the cell is due to the potassium efflux. Efflux means getting out. At rest, this is called as resting membrane potential. So even at rest, potassium is getting out of the cell. So the cause of resting membrane potential is mainly due to the potassium efflux. So the neuron RMP. So what is resting membrane potential seen in neuron is about minus 70 millivolts, and the cause of this resting membrane potential is due to the diffusion of potassium ions. That is also called as diffusion potential of mainly potassium, right? So now here you can see this is the inner potassium. As the potassium is very high, it tries to go outside. So diffusion potential is mainly dependent on charge of potassium, permeability, that is even at rest potassium is permeable in cells, and it also depends on the concentration gradient. So the resting membrane potential of different cells like skeletal muscle have about minus 90 millivolts, and resting membrane potential of cardiac ventricle mainly have minus 90 millivolts. So now let us see restless membrane potential. This is looking like a new word, right? So there it is resting. It is restless means it is unstable potential values, mainly the RMP. This restless membrane potential oscillates between the minus 60 millivolts to minus 40 millivolts, and it is seen mainly in pacemakers. So example like in SA node, Kajal cells of GIT, and also in Prebozinger complex, which is present in our respiratory system, mainly in our medulla. So all these are the pacemakers. So this is restless membrane potential, that is unstable potential values, and this oscillates mainly between minus 60 millivolts and minus 40 millivolts. So this contribution to restless membrane potential is mainly by diffusion of potassium plays a major role, and diffusion of sodium also plays, but here it's a minor role, and it produces about minus 86 millivolts of RMP. So we know normally minus 90 in the case of skeletal muscle or cardiac muscle. So by sodium and potassium we are getting about minus 86 millivolts of RMP. So remaining minus 4 millivolts is produced by our sodium potassium ATPase pump. So RMP is affected only by this RMP. Now we are talking about is resting membrane potential. So resting membrane potential is mainly affected only by the change in the potassium levels, and in hyperkalemia means in blood or outside there is lot of potassium. So what happens, inside there is already high potassium and outside there is high potassium, means this inside potassium normal diffusion of potassium from inside to outside of the cell will not happen, because already outside there is lot of potassium. So now from inside the potassium will not go outside, and inside becomes positive because this potassium is not going. So it undergoes a process of depolarization. So the cell is more excitable now. If it is undergoing depolarization, means already it has reached the threshold, so it is now ready to form a action potential. And in the case of hypokalemia means outside the potassium level is very low. Then what happens, this potassium now tries to go more outside, right? So as it goes more outside, that is potassium efflux takes place due to the concentration gradient, right? So the hyperpolarization occurs. Hyperpolarization means now the cell is as the potassium is going more outward, so the cell is becoming now more electronegative. So now it is becoming less excitable, because it is hyperpolarized means I think we need to send again more sodium channels to excite it. Now we have understood about resting membrane potential, restless membrane potential. Now we will discuss about the equilibrium potential. So this equilibrium potential is also known as isoelectric state, means iso means same, right? It is due to the concentration gradient. Potassium moves from inside to outside of the cell, Yes, this creates a negative charge inside the cell. The same thing we are saying from starting, right? So the negative charge thus formed inside the cell attracts the positive charge. This is the new thing which we learn in this equilibrium rotation. Of course, we know inside there is negative charge, so of course it attracts the positive charge. So the potassium ions situated outside the cell. So this creates a electrical gradient. So what they are saying, inside now it is negative. As it is negative, you know, it attracts the positive. So now it finally achieves equilibrium state that outside and inside will be equal. So when concentration gradient is equal to electrical gradient, there will be no ion movement across the cell membrane since both are opposite to each other. So that potential is mainly called as equilibrium potential. So equilibrium potential of sodium is plus 60 millivolts and equilibrium potential of calcium is plus 130 millivolts. So these are the important values to remember. And next we have the Nernst equation. Nernst equation is to mainly calculate the equilibrium potential for the single ion, only for single ion. Like you can have an example here, Ex may be any single ion, plus or minus 61 of log concentration outside by concentration inside, or also we can write it as plus or minus 61 log concentration inside by outside. Why we are saying this inside by outside? Because let us put only the highest value outside. We will also see some sums related to this, so you can get an idea how to calculate them. So the equilibrium potential mainly corresponds to inside of the cell, and the ions always move from high concentration to low concentration. So positive charge moving inside the cell and positive equilibrium potential. And if positive charge is moving outside the cell, so this you can understand, if the positive charge is moving inside the cell, means the cell is becoming more positive inside and causing a positive equilibrium potential. And if the positive charge is moving outside the cell, then it is causing a negative equilibrium potential. So here we have equilibrium potential of chlorine is about negative minus 70 millivolts, and for potassium is about negative 90 millivolts. And now let's understand the Goldman equation. So Goldman equation is to mainly calculate the equilibrium potential for multiple ions. So we have seen in Nernst equation we can calculate only about single ion, but in Goldman equation we can also calculate for multiple ions like sodium, potassium, chlorine, etc. So parameters which to be considered are mainly concentration of ions and also permeability of ions. So the rapid changes in the permeability of sodium and potassium generation of leads to the generation of action potential. And next moving on to Gibbs-Donan effect. So the Gibbs-Donan effect is nothing but the proton anions are inside, right, are not permeable, and the presence of this non-permeable ion mainly affects the distribution of the permeable ion. So the consequence of this effect is that the protein anions mainly uptake the water, so the cell can swell and burst. So for example, here you can take sodium as an example, as the sodiums are present inside and they are not permeable. So the presence of this non-permeable ion mainly affects the distribution of permeable ion. So this consequence, like the protein anions uptakes more water, so cells can swell and burst. But this is prevented by the sodium and potassium pump pushes the sodium out, so the cells will not burst. I think you can understand this. Now for example, if sodium is stuck inside and lot of water of course follows it, but if this continues, the cell bursts. So the sodium potassium ATPase, what is this? It take out more extra, means 3 sodium are get out from the cell and only 2 potassium are kept inside. So it is taking out more positive ions towards outside for the sick. So the colloid oncotic pressure of albumin mainly regulate the fluid resorption at capillary level due to this effect, that is by Starling forces. So actually proteins are negatively charged, so attract the positively charged this sodium. So when the sodium comes, water comes, so this leads to swelling, but this is prevented by our sodium potassium ATPase. So this is a complete overview summary of this. So even we have this, one of these examples of protein is our albumin protein, which is creating an oncotic pressure of negative charge inside, and this is also called as Starling forces. And next in RMP, this causes a negative inside the cell. So because of this protein only there is negativity inside the cell in resting membrane potential. So this is an electrical gradient. So now let us see the nerve action potential. So the nerve action potential, it has a latent period which is mainly between the stimulus and the response. For example, if we give any stimulus, we get a response. So in between the stimulus and response, we mainly have our latent period, and we'll have different four phases in case of nerve action potential. The first phase is mainly local potential change, which takes the resting membrane potential from -70 to about -55. So here -55 is the threshold. So it is due to the sodium influx, but very less and slow. So phase 1 is nothing but so this I think we can understand by graph. So first phase 1, one stimulus is given and it is taking, this is for example RMP of what they are saying here, -70. So from -70 we can go to up to a stimulus of -55. So this -55 is here threshold, right? And next phase 2. Phase 2 is depolarization. This is mainly due to sodium ion influx rapid, mainly because of voltage gated sodium channels, due to the opening of voltage gated channels during the action potential, and go to +35 close to electron potential of sodium. So now as more sodium is opening due to your voltage gated channels, so now from the threshold it causes a peak, that is depolarization. Okay, now we are going to phase 3. So repolarization mainly due to potassium efflux. So now what happens is it is reached up to here because of sodium influx, that is now positive charge, positive 35. So now again, as more sodium is coming inside, potassium now thinks to go outside. As potassium is going inside, again the value starts falling to negative. So this is called as repolarization. So now we are going to fourth phase, that is hyperpolarization. Here RMP is -90. The GABA causes mainly inhibition by hyperpolarization. So we know GABA, how it causes sedation, how it causes inhibition, that is mainly due to hyperpolarization. That is now what happens is this value further gets down, means from for example 72, it goes up to -90, more negative. This is called as hyperpolarization, which is our phase 4. So GABA is an example here. So hyperpolarization by mainly chlorine influx and potassium efflux. So this you can usually understand if already it is in resting membrane potential about -70 for example, and if we want to make it more negative, then we will add more negative ions. So like more negative influx of chlorine, and also we will take out more potassium out, means potassium is positive, right? If you take out more potassium from the cell, then the cell becomes more negative. So this is the logic for hyperpolarization. And you know GABA agonist is mainly used for sedation. Here we have barbiturates and benzodiazepines as examples. Now we'll check out the absolute refractory period. So what is it? It is mainly from the firing level. So that firing level is nothing but our, in this diagram if you see, this is our firing level, that is our threshold level at -55 for example. So that is our firing level. So from the firing level up to the 1/3 of the repolarization, it is called as absolute refractory period. So up to 1/3 of the repolarization means for example from this firing period up to this repolarization, this period in between, this is repolarization, right? So up to this middle period is called as absolute refractory period. So during this period mainly second stimulus has no response, that is if you give any second stimulus it will not show any kind of response. And next we have the relative refractory period. This is also like from the period of second stimulus up to the maximal strength that produces action potential. So that is the relative refractory period. So relative refractory period is nothing but from this second time to maximum time, it will produce action potential finally in the relative refractory period. And next let us see the gate concept. So gate concept is nothing but voltage gated sodium channels have mainly two gates. So what are those? That is M means activation gate and H means inactivation gate. So for example this is a sodium channel, and here you can see this is an M gate, activation gate, and this is a H gate, that is inactivation gate. So now let us understand this both. Resting state means in resting RMP, in resting membrane potential, the M gate is closed and H gate is open. So what they are saying, M gate is closed, so this is closed, but the H gate is open. Even though it is open, if M gate is closed, still the ions cannot move, the sodium ions can't move. And open state, in open state, that is in depolarization, depolarization is due to sodium influx. Both the gates are open, sodium can freely move. If both are open, of course both sodium can easily move. And in inactivation state, that is repolarization, that is when potassium efflux takes place, the M gate is open. This M gate is open, but the H gate is closed. Even though H gate is closed and M gate is open, but this as one, at least in the sodium gates, if only one is closed also, the sodium or any ions cannot pass easily. Now let us see the driving force. Driving force is mainly to assess the direction of movement of ions, and the driving force is equal to this is the formula, membrane potential minus equilibrium potential. So example for sodium, here you can see driving force of minus 90 minus plus 60, because plus 60 is of equilibrium potential of sodium. So we get finally the answer of driving force is sodium of minus 150 millivolts. So if the driving force is negative, a positive charge ion tend to move inside the cell. That is what we need to remember. So if the driving force, so in the case of your sodium, you can see the driving force is negative, means the positively charged ion tend to move inside the cell. So now the positive charge moves inside the cell. And now we have some MCQs. For example, like muscle cells have intracellular chloride of about 11 millimeters and extracellular chloride of 110. So equilibrium potential for the chlorine is, so how to find that? So we know the formula, what is the equilibrium potential. So from here, from this formula, you can see here equilibrium potential plus or minus 61 log. So let us solve this. Plus or minus 61 log of concentration inside by concentration outside. So plus or minus 61 log of, in first put a higher value, 110 by 10. Yeah, 110 by 11, I think so. Yeah, 110 by 11. So 11, 10 log 10 is nothing but 1, so you get plus or minus 61 around that. So here we'll take the minus 60 value, because intracellular chloride is inside the cell it is negative, because chloride is present mainly outside the cell, but inside the cell it is not positive, it is negative. So the answer is minus 60. So which of the following is responsible for the change in membrane potential between the points B and D? So your answer is potassium efflux. So actually D and D, this diagram you are not having. Potassium efflux rates, actually they are showing in this D and D points repolarization. So we know repolarization is due to potassium efflux. So this is the answer. So this is all about our discussion in membrane potential.